Did Meghan Markle just see her Hollywood dreams vanish in a single afternoon? Imagine walking into a room where everyone is supposed to celebrate you, where every handshake and smile should mark the start of something monumental, only to leave humiliated, blindsided, and suddenly irrelevant. That's exactly what insiders are saying happened at Amazon MGM Studios when Meghan faced the most publicized, career-altering confrontation of her Hollywood journey. And at the center of it all was Jason Orley, a man whose influence in the industry is whispered about in boardrooms and feared in every corner of Tinseltown. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The world has watched Meghan's rise from royal scandal to Hollywood ambition, a journey punctuated by op-eds, interviews, and public appearances designed to redefine her image. But behind the carefully curated headlines, the real story, the one no one is talking about, is far messier, more shocking, and far more revealing about the power dynamics in Hollywood than anyone would expect. This isn't a story about glittering premieres or celebrity accolades. This is about raw ambition, ruthless gatekeeping, and the crushing reality of a system that doesn't just reject. You can be publicly erased. It started as a dream. Meghan had her sights set on Amazon MGM, a powerhouse in Hollywood with a history of launching careers to stratospheric heights. For her, it wasn't just a business opportunity. It was a chance to carve out an identity outside the royal shadow, to prove she belonged on the world's most prestigious stages. Meetings were set, scripts were reviewed, and whispers of multi-million-dollar deals began circulating in Hollywood's rumor mill. On paper, everything was perfect. The dream was alive. But in Hollywood, perfection is often the precursor to disaster. Jason Orley's reputation precedes him. Known for his meticulous control over productions and his sometimes brutal approach to talent management, Orley is the kind of executive whose approval can make or break careers. If he favors you, doors open wide. If he doesn't, well, the stories aren't pretty. Actors, directors, and producers talk about him in hushed tones, sharing cautionary tales of public reprimands, subtly sabotaged projects, and deals that evaporated overnight. Meghan, as the insiders suggest, had no idea just how high the stakes were, or how quickly the tables could turn. In turn they did. What began as routine meetings escalated into tense exchanges, subtle tests of power, and moments designed to unsettle. Imagine being an accomplished woman, used to navigating scrutiny and public opinion, only to encounter a system calibrated to break you down in ways you never anticipated. Sources reveal that the interactions with Orley and his inner circle weren't merely professional. They were strategic, psychologically calibrated, and, in some cases, downright humiliating. Every smile Meghan offered, every confident statement, was met with cold calculation, the kind that's invisible to the public eye but devastating in its consequences. At the heart of this story is a moment that insiders describe as the tipping point, a confrontation that would ripple across studios, media outlets, and social networks. Meghan, for the first time, was reportedly left speechless in a setting where silence is a luxury no one can afford. And while the public sees only headlines and photos, the reality behind those doors was far more dramatic. The meeting wasn't just a negotiation. It was a crucible, testing her ambitions, resilience, and the very viability of her Hollywood career. And when it ended, what should have been a stepping stone had instead become an obstacle she couldn't yet see how to overcome. Why does this matter now? Hollywood is often portrayed as glamorous, a land of opportunity where talent alone determines success. Meghan's experience exposes the less visible, darker mechanics of the industry: influence, favoritism, and, in some cases, deliberate sabotage. Her story isn't just a cautionary tale for celebrities. It's a window into the machinery of power that shapes the careers of thousands who never make the headlines. It's about timing, alliances, and the unseen hands that can elevate or erase someone in a heartbeat. Even more shocking, insiders suggest that Meghan's supposed support network was far less reliable than the public might assume. Agents, advisors, and PR teams, typically her shield against industry pitfalls, reportedly struggled to mitigate the damage. Emails went unanswered, calls were redirected, and advice came too late. The isolation, compounded by the public nature of the humiliation, made a professional setback feel intensely personal. Imagine being told, without ambiguity, that the path you believed was open is now obstructed by forces beyond your control, and there's no clear way forward. And yet, the story isn't just about humiliation. It's about stakes, strategy, and survival. Meghan's Hollywood ambitions were not trivial. They were carefully mapped, strategically planned, and fueled by both personal and financial imperatives. The Amazon MGM opportunity was, for all intents and purposes, a launchpad. Losing it, or having it tarnished by public and private conflict, meant recalibrating not just a career, but a vision of self that had taken years to construct. The emotional weight of that cannot be overstated. Hope, excitement, anticipation, all replaced with doubt, anxiety, and the harsh glare of scrutiny. But this story is also a narrative about power, how it is wielded, how it is negotiated, and how it can be weaponized against even the most resilient figures. Jason Orley's role in this narrative is pivotal. He represents the gatekeepers of Hollywood, the people who decide which projects move forward, which careers flourish, and which are quietly, but decisively, shut down. For Meghan, the confrontation wasn't just a personal clash. It was a window into a system where ambition and strategy collide with legacy, influence, and often calculated cruelty. So what actually happened? How did a star who had navigated the glare of global media find herself vulnerable, exposed, and publicly undermined? What were the precise moments of tension that insiders describe as career-altering? And most importantly, could this setback be reversed, or has the door truly closed on Meghan's Hollywood dream? These questions form the spine of this story, teasing revelations that only become clear as the narrative unfolds. And believe me, the answers are far more shocking than most expect. In the next chapters, we'll unpack the full scope of this saga. We'll start by looking at Meghan's initial ambitions, her meetings with Amazon MGM, and the delicate dance of negotiation that precedes every major Hollywood deal. From there, we'll explore the rising tension, the subtle power plays, and ultimately, the confrontation that changed everything. Along the way, you'll see the human side of ambition, the vulnerability, hope, and resilience that drive people toward the seemingly impossible, and the harsh realities that can dismantle it just as quickly. And yet, even as the story begins in disappointment, it is also a story of revelation. We will see how the mechanisms of power work in Hollywood, how reputations are made and unmade, and how ambition can collide with the gatekeepers who control the industry. Every chapter will reveal another layer, from the strategic maneuvering behind closed doors to the personal toll of being publicly undermined. It's a tale that is at once cautionary, shocking, and endlessly compelling. But here's the thing. What came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Behind the smiles, the scripts, and the deals, forces were aligning in ways that would make or break Meghan's ambitions. Friends turned advisors, allies turned detractors, and whispers turned into decisive actions. The scene at Amazon MGM was only the beginning. The real story is about power, ambition, and the high stakes of Hollywood, where one misstep can define a career, and one confrontation can echo across the entire industry. The question now isn't just what happened, but why it happened. Why did this meeting spiral into humiliation? Why did a once promising opportunity suddenly seem like a closed door? And most importantly, what does it reveal about the hidden rules of Hollywood? The rules that no one talks about until it's too late? These questions will drive our exploration as we peel back each layer of the narrative, exposing the drama, betrayal, and strategic missteps that define Meghan's experience in this high-stakes, high-pressure world. By the time we finish, you won't just understand what happened at Amazon MGM. You'll understand the underlying power dynamics that make or break careers in Hollywood. You'll see how ambition intersects with influence, how reputation is weaponized, and why even the most resilient individuals can find themselves on the losing side of an invisible war. And you'll be left wondering, if it can happen to Meghan Markle, could it happen to anyone in the industry? Could it even happen to you? That sets the stage. The curtain has lifted, the players are in place, and the stakes have never been higher. In the chapters to come, we will journey behind the glitz and glamour, revealing the raw, unvarnished story of ambition, humiliation, and the struggle to reclaim a dream in the unforgiving landscape of Hollywood. The introduction is complete, and the narrative is now primed to move into the first chapter. The Hollywood dream begins, where we dive into Meghan's early ambitions, the planning, and the promise that made the eventual humiliation all the more devastating. Did anyone really believe that Hollywood would roll out the red carpet for Meghan Markle? Not the Meghan the world saw at royal events. Not the Meghan who had navigated tabloid storms and public scrutiny with grace. Hollywood isn't about grace. It's about power, timing, and perception. And from the moment Meghan set foot on its glossy, sun-drenched streets, she was walking into a world that had rules she didn't yet know, and people who thrived on exploiting that ignorance. The dream began as all Hollywood dreams do, bright, intoxicating, and seemingly limitless. For Meghan, this wasn't just another acting gig or media venture. This was her chance to define herself entirely outside the royal framework, to demonstrate that she wasn't just a figurehead or a tabloid headline. She wanted credibility, she wanted influence, and most of all, she wanted autonomy. Hollywood, however, is a place where autonomy is rarely granted and often challenged. Success isn't given. It's earned, fought for, and sometimes taken by the powerful, whether you like it or not. Her initial meetings with Amazon MGM were promising on paper. Scripts circulated that promised complex roles and narrative control. Executives spoke in polite, encouraging tones, hinting at opportunities that could make her a defining figure in contemporary entertainment. The environment seemed supportive, even warm. But warmth in Hollywood can be deceptive. A smile can be a trap, a handshake can conceal ulterior motives, and a nod of approval might just be the prelude to a professional trapdoor opening beneath you. From insiders' accounts, Meghan entered these meetings with a combination of excitement and caution. She understood the stakes. She knew the scrutiny she would face, not just from Hollywood insiders, but from a global audience primed to interpret every gesture and statement. Yet, nothing could have prepared her for the subtle, almost imperceptible power plays that would unfold behind closed doors. At first, they were small, a delayed response, a half-smile, a carefully chosen word that seemed off. Then, as the meetings progressed, the tension escalated. Meghan's intuition told her something was off, but in a world where perception equals currency, she couldn't act on intuition alone. Imagine preparing for the meeting of your life. You've studied every angle, rehearsed every line, and envisioned every possible outcome. And then, from the moment you walk into the room, you feel the temperature drop. Eyes linger in ways that are uncomfortable. Voices soften, but the subtext cuts deeper than any open criticism. Every word you speak is weighed, measured, and evaluated. That's where Meghan found herself, and it's where her Hollywood dream teetered precariously on the edge. Her interactions with Jason Orley, even at this early stage, were fraught with tension. Orley isn't the kind of executive who overtly threatens or intimidates. His style is much more subtle. A raised eyebrow, a pointed question, a half-hidden sigh. He has a way of making even the most confident talent second-guess themselves, to feel as if every move must be calculated, every gesture scrutinized. Meghan, used to navigating the overtly hostile media but unaccustomed to this precise, surgical form of professional pressure, found herself on unfamiliar ground. And in Hollywood, unfamiliar ground is where many careers begin to unravel. But ambition drives people to test limits, and Meghan was no exception. She leaned into the process, showing confidence, articulating vision, and attempting to assert influence over the discussions. Yet Hollywood doesn't always reward clarity or confidence, especially when it comes from someone outside its established hierarchy. Each carefully constructed point she made was met with mild resistance, not overtly hostile, but enough to plant seeds of doubt, seeds that would later flourish into full-blown obstacles. The emotional stakes were enormous. For Meghan, this wasn't just about roles or revenue. It was about validation. After leaving the royal spotlight, after weathering public scrutiny, she wanted proof that she could succeed on merit, on vision, and on skill. Each meeting, each discussion, was a step toward that validation, or so she thought. Insiders report that the tension between expectation and reality began to accumulate, almost imperceptibly, until it reached a tipping point. And as anyone who's ever worked in high-stakes environments knows, tipping points often come suddenly, without warning, and with consequences that can't easily be undone. Consider the psychology of such a space. Hollywood thrives on hierarchy and influence. Decisions are rarely made purely on talent or potential. Relationships, loyalty, and perceived control matter far more than outsiders imagine. And Meghan, despite her global profile, was an outsider. She brought visibility, certainly, but visibility alone doesn't confer power. Power must be earned, navigated, and protected, and she was entering a battlefield where the rules were opaque and the gatekeepers were formidable. Her team, advisors, and PR strategists were acutely aware of these dynamics. Emails flew, schedules were optimized, and strategy sessions stretched late into the night. Every move was designed to mitigate risk and maximize opportunity. And yet, even the best-laid plans can fail when confronted with unanticipated resistance. Jason Orley, with his quiet authority, was exactly that resistance. He didn't need to make a dramatic statement. His mere presence, his carefully timed interventions, and his network of influence were enough to unsettle even the most prepared talent. The first hints of trouble came subtly, a line of dialogue that Orley questioned in a meeting. A casual remark in a hallway conversation that seemed innocuous but carried the weight of professional judgment. Meghan's initial optimism began to clash with a growing sense of scrutiny. She felt the shift, but like many navigating unfamiliar hierarchies, she tried to reinterpret the signals, to read them in a positive light. Hollywood rewards resilience, but it also punishes naivety. That fine line is where many careers are tested. By the time the first major meeting concluded, insiders described Meghan as cautiously optimistic but visibly shaken. The interactions had been polite, superficially productive, but underneath, tension simmered. Every word she had spoken was analyzed afterward. Every gesture scrutinized. The dream that had seemed so attainable just hours earlier now felt fragile, almost precarious. And as she left that room, the whisper of a question echoed in the back of her mind. Am I being set up for failure? Behind the scenes, executives and studio insiders were already speculating. Meghan's profile was a double-edged sword. It drew attention and potential revenue, but it also threatened the status quo. Hollywood doesn't always welcome disruption, even when the disruptor is famous, talented, or influential in other spheres. Jason Orley, known for his meticulous oversight, reportedly began positioning the room, the deals, and even the conversations to test not just Meghan's ambition but her resilience under pressure. Every smile, every nod, every carefully worded agreement was part of a larger chessboard, one where the stakes were higher than anyone outside the boardroom could imagine. And yet, Meghan pressed on. She understood, in some measure, that ambition requires risk. But ambition also requires clarity of vision, allies, and a keen understanding of the terrain. In this moment, the terrain was treacherous, and the allies were fewer than they appeared. Every step forward carried potential gain, yes, but also the seeds of professional peril. The tension between hope and risk, between optimism and reality, was palpable. And as with many high-stakes situations, the consequences of a single misstep were enormous. This chapter of her journey, which began with excitement and promise, was quietly setting the stage for a dramatic confrontation. The very people who should have supported her, agents, advisors, and insiders, were navigating their own priorities, sometimes aligned with her interests, sometimes not. In Hollywood, alignment is rarely complete. It's negotiable, fluid, and often mercurial. Meghan's dream, brilliant and ambitious as it was, faced forces she couldn't yet fully measure. Every decision, every conversation, every nod of approval was now part of a complex interplay between visibility, credibility, and power. So, as Meghan stepped out of that first critical meeting, the glimmer of her Hollywood dream was still there, but it was already flickering. The stage was set, the players were in position, and the unseen rules of influence were beginning to exert themselves. What seemed like routine negotiations were, in truth, the first rounds of a far more intense struggle. And the next moments, Moments that would define her trajectory in the industry were closer than she realized. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. If you think power in Hollywood is visible, think again. Sometimes the most influential figures are the ones you never hear about in headlines, whose impact is measured not by awards or red carpet appearances, but by the silent ripple they create in every decision. Jason Orley is one of those figures. He doesn't shout. He doesn't pose for photos. Yet his fingerprints are on projects that dominate the industry, and the people who cross him often disappear from the conversation entirely. And when Meghan Markle stepped into his orbit, she was stepping into a world where influence isn't just wielded, it's a weapon. From the start, Orley's reputation preceded him. Insiders describe him as meticulous, calculating, and ruthless, but always in ways that are subtle enough to avoid public scrutiny. He is the type of executive who doesn't need to yell or belittle. A carefully timed question, a casual remark, a raised eyebrow can undermine even the most confident talent. People in the industry often say that Orley doesn't make mistakes, but he does make enemies, quietly, professionally, and sometimes permanently. Meghan first encountered Orley in a series of meetings meant to solidify her role in an Amazon MGM project. On paper, it was straightforward. She was talented, bankable, and visible. But Orley's approach was anything but straightforward. He questioned decisions, challenged assumptions, and tested not just her ability to perform, but her resilience under pressure. According to sources, Meghan initially interpreted this as standard negotiation. After all, she had faced scrutiny in the public eye before, but she quickly realized this was different. This wasn't just evaluation. This was a test of her presence, her strategic thinking, and her capacity to endure subtle psychological pressure. Orley's power lies in his ability to operate in shadows. While talent and agents strategize in conference rooms, he moves several steps ahead. He's aware of who matters, who whispers to whom, and whose influence carries weight behind the scenes. Meghan, despite her global profile, was entering a system where her visibility was a liability as much as an asset. The very qualities that made her a household name, the poise, the public persona, the media savvy, were under scrutiny by someone who measured success differently, by control, by hierarchy, by who could be elevated and who could be sidelined. From insiders, we learned that the first few exchanges between Meghan and Orley were deceptively polite. Smiles were exchanged, handshakes were firm, but there was a tension underlying the conversation, a subtle war of positioning. Orley asked questions that seemed simple but were loaded with professional landmines. He requested clarifications, probed for weaknesses, and observed reactions with the precision of a chess grandmaster studying his opponent. For someone accustomed to navigating public judgment, Meghan was now facing judgment in its most concentrated, private form, a form she hadn't fully prepared for. Consider the psychology at play here. Orley's influence isn't about overt domination. It's about creating uncertainty, making you question your assumptions, and forcing you to reveal more than you intend. Meghan, trained to handle scrutiny, was now being challenged in a way that was intimate, deliberate, and strategically disorienting. Every confident response was met with subtle counterpoints. Every idea she pitched was dissected for hidden flaws. And while outwardly polite, the room was thick with tension, each participant aware that the stakes were higher than they seemed. One key tactic Orley reportedly used was what insiders call controlled destabilization. It's a method where a figure of influence introduces small inconsistencies or obstacles to gauge responses. The goal isn't confrontation, it's revelation. How does someone respond under pressure? How do they navigate authority they can't control? Meghan, who had thrived under media scrutiny, was now learning the difference between public and private pressure. In this environment, one misstep could shift perception instantly, and perception in Hollywood is often more important than reality. The stakes were further complicated by the fact that Meghan wasn't just another actor in Orley's ecosystem. She was high-profile, globally recognized, and subject to media amplification. Any misstep, any sign of hesitation, any moment of doubt could be magnified and leveraged. Orley's strategy, insiders say, often involves subtle positioning where information leaks and perception management intersect. In other words, What happened behind the doors didn't stay behind the doors. It could ripple outward, shaping the narrative in ways that benefited him and the studio while undermining those who misstepped. Despite these challenges, Meghan attempted to navigate the space strategically. She projected confidence, articulated her vision, and engaged proactively. But Orley's presence had a way of testing the limits of patience, composure, and strategic thinking. Even moments of small victories, an agreed-upon term, a minor concession, were framed within the larger context of control. He didn't simply negotiate. He orchestrated an environment where her every decision and gesture was under scrutiny. The balance between ambition and caution was razor-thin, and one miscalculation could carry consequences far beyond the immediate meeting. Emotional stakes ran high. Meghan was operating not just under professional pressure, but under personal scrutiny as well. This was about her career trajectory, her credibility in Hollywood, and her ability to step out of a royal shadow into a new arena. Every critique, every challenge, and every subtle maneuver by Orley carried a psychological weight that tested resilience, self-perception, and confidence. The environment was deliberately high stakes, and it wasn't meant to be comfortable. It was meant to reveal character, and sometimes it was meant to break it. As the days progressed, the tension escalated. Meetings grew longer, discussions more pointed. Sources suggest that Orley's approach shifted from subtle testing to strategic pressure. Lines of dialogue were questioned publicly in group settings. Ideas were dissected in ways that forced Meghan to defend herself repeatedly. While she had the talent, the poise, and the intelligence to navigate complex conversations, the environment was engineered to push her to the edge of doubt and frustration. The psychological strain was palpable, even to those observing from the periphery. And yet, Meghan pressed on. She understood that Hollywood isn't a meritocracy in the way many outsiders imagine. Survival here requires strategy, resilience, and an acute awareness of power dynamics. She sought allies, built networks, and attempted to navigate Orley's influence with tact and precision. But in a space where influence is concentrated and power can be quietly weaponized, even the most deliberate strategy is vulnerable. One wrong impression, one poorly timed response, or one misjudged alliance could tilt the balance. And insiders hint that this balance was precarious from the very beginning. So, the question becomes, how does someone as experienced and media-savvy as Meghan Markle navigate a world where power is hidden, influence is strategic, and stakes are invisible until it's too late? The answer is complex and revealing. Hollywood, as it turns out, is a place where talent alone doesn't guarantee success. Reputation, perception, and alignment with gatekeepers like Jason Orley matter far more. And Meghan, despite her global profile and professional acumen, was entering a system that measures success by its own rules, rules that can be as unforgiving as they are opaque. By the end of these early encounters, insiders report that Meghan's optimism was tempered by a growing awareness of just how intricate and perilous the landscape was. She could see the ambition, understand the opportunity, but she was also beginning to sense the hidden barriers, the subtle power plays, and the stakes she hadn't fully anticipated. The introduction to Jason Orley was not just a meeting. It was an initiation into a hierarchy she had to navigate or risk being sidelined entirely. And just as she was beginning to adjust to this new reality, whispers started circulating, hints that the true challenges were not yet visible. Behind closed doors, decisions were being made, alliances were forming, and strategic moves were being set into motion. Meghan's initial encounters with Orley were only the opening act. What followed, insiders suggest, would escalate into a confrontation so stark it would ripple across her career, challenge her resilience, and put the future of her Hollywood dream in jeopardy. But what happened next would push Meghan further than she had ever been tested. And the fallout would shock everyone, inside and outside the industry. If you think a Hollywood deal is just about signing a contract, think again. In reality, it's a living, breathing negotiation, a strategic dance where every word, gesture, and glance is weighed against unseen forces. For Meghan Markle, her potential deal with Amazon MGM wasn't just another opportunity. It was her chance to stake a claim in Hollywood on her own terms. A career-defining role, a platform to prove she belonged, and a validation of her ambition outside the royal spotlight. And yet, insiders say, from the very beginning, the deal was already fraught with hidden obstacles she couldn't see. The promise was enormous. Scripts circulated with her name attached, executives spoke of creative freedom, and the public buzz hinted at an unprecedented trajectory for a figure transitioning from royalty to Hollywood prominence. On paper, everything was aligned: talent, visibility, and strategic timing. But Hollywood, as Meghan would quickly learn, rarely operates on paper. It operates on influence, hierarchy, and leverage, and when those forces collide with ambition, even the brightest prospects can stumble. Negotiations began formally, with Meghan and her team reviewing contracts, scripts, and expectations. At first, the discussions seemed promising. There were nods of approval from key executives, tentative agreements on roles and responsibilities, and a sense of cautious optimism. But beneath the surface, insiders describe a far more complex dynamic. Every concession offered by Meghan was analyzed, every question she asked about creative control was scrutinized, and every expression of ambition was measured against the studio's vision. She quickly realized that getting a deal was not merely about talent. It was about perception, strategy, and alignment with power players. One of the most pivotal figures in this process, of course, was Jason Orley. By this point, Meghan had a growing understanding of just how much influence he wielded. Orley didn't overtly veto ideas. Instead, he used subtle tactics to shape conversations, redirect negotiations, and test resilience. He asked questions that appeared casual but were loaded with significance. How would you handle this scenario? He might ask, and in his phrasing, he revealed the stakes, the expectations, and the hidden power dynamics at play. Every response Meghan gave was carefully noted, both for its content and for its tone, her confidence, and her ability to navigate pressure. What made the situation particularly challenging was the duality of Meghan's position. On one hand, she brought unmatched visibility and media attention. On the other, she was perceived by insiders as an outsider to Hollywood's tightly controlled ecosystem. In essence, her fame was both an asset and a liability. Every potential success carried the risk of backlash, and every misstep was amplified by the very media that initially celebrated her arrival. Hollywood loves a star, but it also fears one who arrives with their own momentum. Meghan's profile meant she could shape narratives, but only if she could survive the scrutiny and navigate the subtle games of power. Insiders recount moments in the negotiation process where Meghan's optimism clashed with the strategic realities of the studio. Lines of dialogue were questioned, deadlines and timelines shifted, and subtle pressure points emerged. What should have been straightforward discussions about roles and creative input became psychological chess matches. Orley, with his reputation for strategic influence, reportedly orchestrated these interactions to assess not just what Meghan wanted, but how she would respond under duress. Could she adapt? Could she maintain composure? Could she assert herself without alienating powerful allies? These questions framed the negotiation in ways that were invisible to outsiders, but utterly consequential. Meanwhile, Meghan's team worked tirelessly behind the scenes, strategizing about every possible contingency. Contracts were reviewed multiple times, advisors provided continuous feedback, and every communication was meticulously planned. But Hollywood negotiations, insiders say, are rarely linear or predictable. Power shifts, alliances change, and subtle interventions can upend even the most carefully structured deals. Meghan's challenge was not just to secure a contract. It was to navigate a landscape where influence often trumps merit and perception often outweighs reality. Emotional stakes were at their peak. This deal wasn't just a professional milestone. It was a personal validation. After leaving the royal spotlight and facing global scrutiny, Meghan needed more than a contract. She needed proof that her ambition, skill, and vision could stand on their own. Every meeting, every conversation, and every subtle test of her resilience carried weight far beyond the boardroom. The outcome would signal whether she could truly thrive in Hollywood, or whether she would be quietly marginalized. Yet, even with all her preparation, Meghan began noticing warning signs. Small delays in communication, ambiguous responses from executives, and subtle shifts in tone suggested that the path wasn't as clear as it had seemed. Some insiders hinted that Orley was deliberately introducing obstacles to test her reaction. Would she push forward with determination, or would she flinch under pressure? And in Hollywood, insiders warn a single misstep, even one as small as a hesitation or a poorly chosen phrase, can have consequences that extend far beyond the immediate negotiation. Despite these tensions, Meghan pressed on. She articulated her vision for the project, emphasized her creative goals, and navigated the complex web of expectations with professionalism. But Hollywood, insiders caution, rarely rewards ambition in isolation. The system favors alignment, strategic alliances, and the ability to operate within its unspoken hierarchies. Meghan's challenge was not just to secure a deal. It was to earn trust, establish credibility, and demonstrate resilience in a landscape designed to test both patience and perseverance. Then came a turning point. According to insiders, during one high-stakes meeting, Meghan was presented with an unexpected twist, a shift in the terms of her potential role, framed as an opportunity but laden with subtle constraints. The alteration wasn't overtly negative, but it fundamentally changed the nature of the project and her creative control. The offer that had seemed promising now carried hidden strings, and the pressure to respond strategically intensified. Every choice she made in that moment could influence not only the deal, but also her professional reputation and future opportunities within the studio. The psychological weight of this realization cannot be overstated. Meghan was forced to navigate a scenario in which the terms of her career were not fully transparent, where the stakes were both professional and deeply personal. This was no longer just a negotiation. It was a test of endurance, strategy, and instinct. And in Hollywood, insiders say, endurance is often the difference between a fleeting opportunity and a career-defining breakthrough or collapse. Her advisors reportedly urged caution, emphasizing the need for careful wording, strategic patience, and measured responses. Yet, even with preparation, Meghan had to confront the emotional reality of the situation. Her ambition, her dreams, and her reputation were all on the line. Every conversation, every subtle gesture, carried implications that extended far beyond the immediate room. The balance between assertiveness and diplomacy, between vision and compromise, was delicate and precarious. And just as Meghan was beginning to navigate this delicate terrain, whispers began circulating about the limits of her support network. Some advisors reportedly struggled to align with her vision, while others were constrained by the broader political dynamics within the studio. In Hollywood, loyalty is often conditional, and even well-intentioned allies can be constrained by the hierarchy and influence of gatekeepers like Orley. Meghan's challenge was compounded. She had to manage not only her own strategy, but also the complex dynamics of those around her. The culmination of these pressures set the stage for what insiders describe as the pivotal moment in the deal, a confrontation in which the stakes were made explicit, the power dynamics revealed in stark terms, and the trajectory of Meghan's Hollywood ambitions placed on a knife edge. The deal that had once seemed promising now carried the potential to define, or derail, her career entirely. Every decision, every response, and every reaction mattered. And yet, as dramatic as this turning point was, it was only the prelude to the confrontation that would ultimately test Meghan in ways she had never experienced before. But what came next would push Meghan beyond negotiation and into the arena of humiliation, a moment that insiders say would alter the course of her Hollywood journey forever. From the outside, Hollywood looks glamorous. Red carpets, sparkling lights, A-list parties, and the promise of fame and fortune. But as Meghan Markle was about to discover, the reality behind the cameras is far harsher. The lights illuminate ambition, but they also cast shadows where insecurity, jealousy, and power games lurk. For someone stepping into a new Hollywood arena, the excitement of opportunity can quickly collide with subtle signals that all is not as it seems. And for Meghan, those signals began appearing almost immediately. The first days on set seemed normal enough. Polite greetings, scripted interactions, and the carefully curated professionalism that Hollywood expects. Yet insiders reveal that beneath the surface, tension simmered. Staff members, who appeared welcoming, sometimes offered backhanded compliments or withheld information. Production assistants and junior crew seemed deferential in public, but their whispers behind closed doors hinted at skepticism about Meghan's place in the project. The red flags were subtle: a delay in delivering a script, a misplaced call, an offhand comment about experience. Nothing overt, nothing scandalous, but enough to make someone sensitive to the dynamics pause. Imagine walking into a room and feeling eyes on you, even when no one is directly speaking. You smile, you nod, you try to project confidence, but the weight of scrutiny is palpable. For Meghan, accustomed to navigating global media but not the intricate hierarchies of a Hollywood studio, the difference was stark. The power plays were invisible, yet their impact was immediate. Every handshake, every exchange, carried the potential to shape perception in ways that would follow her long after the cameras stopped rolling. Insiders described the first significant red flag as a subtle exclusion. Meghan was scheduled to attend a planning session for a major scene, but at the last minute, she was asked to wait outside while certain discussions occurred. On paper, it could have been an innocent scheduling change. In reality, those who orchestrated it reportedly aimed to test her reaction, to see how she would respond when subtly sidelined. Meghan reportedly noticed the pattern. A series of exclusions and small adjustments that, individually, could be explained away, but collectively signaled an emerging dynamic she had not anticipated. Small moments of tension began to accumulate. Scripts that were promised in advance arrived late, leaving her to adapt quickly on set. Crew members who were polite one day seemed distant the next. Notes on performance, supposedly constructive, carried undertones of skepticism or doubt. These were not overt attacks, but psychological pressure points, calibrated to unsettle even someone experienced at public scrutiny. Meghan was learning, in real time, that Hollywood tests its players in ways that are subtle, persistent, and psychologically strategic. The emotional impact of these red flags was amplified by the environment. Studios like Amazon MGM are not just workplaces, they are arenas where reputation, visibility, and influence collide. For someone stepping into this arena as a high-profile outsider, the stakes are intense. Every misstep is magnified. Every hesitation can be interpreted as weakness. Every small victory must be balanced against the unseen judgment of those who control the trajectory of a career. Meghan, already conscious of the public gaze, now had to navigate the invisible scrutiny of Hollywood insiders. It wasn't just the crew and production staff that posed challenges. Other actors on set, while polite, occasionally contributed to the sense of exclusion. Hollywood is fiercely competitive, and the introduction of a globally recognized figure into an existing hierarchy can unsettle established dynamics. Some actors reportedly questioned her preparedness or subtly highlighted her lack of prior experience in certain types of production work. While these comments could be dismissed as routine industry chatter, combined with the other subtle signals, they created an undercurrent of tension that Meghan could not ignore. Even small logistical issues took on outsized significance. Delays in makeup, costume adjustments, or missed cues, minor annoyances in any production, became symbolic of deeper challenges. Was she being treated differently because of her status? Was this intentional, a way to test resilience, or simply coincidence? In Hollywood, perception is often reality, and Meghan was learning that the line between professional oversight and deliberate undermining is incredibly thin. Insiders note that the cumulative effect of these red flags began to erode confidence, not in skill, but in expectation. Meghan had entered Hollywood believing that talent, preparation, and professionalism would be enough. But the environment demanded more. Constant vigilance, strategic interpretation of subtext, and an acute awareness of power structures. Every interaction became a test, and every day on set added weight to the growing tension. The emotional stakes intensified when a public incident occurred. During a routine scene rehearsal, an adjustment in the script, supposedly minor, was communicated to other actors but not to Meghan. She entered the scene following the original plan, only to realize mid-action that everyone else had been operating under new directives. Insiders say she was caught off guard, visibly confused, and momentarily flustered. To anyone observing, it could have seemed like a simple mistake or miscommunication. In reality, It was emblematic of the subtle ways power and influence were being exercised. Meghan, despite her poise, felt the impact deeply. Humor, irony, and contradiction often define Hollywood's behind-the-scenes world. On set, smiles mask tension, politeness conceals judgment, and professionalism hides calculated maneuvering. Meghan, navigating these layers, had to constantly recalibrate. She had to ask herself, is this oversight genuine, or is it deliberate? Is the crew being uncooperative, or is this a test of my patience and adaptability? Every decision, every response, carried ramifications she could not yet fully measure. Her advisors reportedly noticed the pattern and warned her. These are red flags, one insider said. Small things that accumulate. Watch for patterns, not just incidents. But Meghan, driven by determination and ambition, continued to push forward. She approached each day with preparation, professionalism, and optimism. But the undercurrent of subtle exclusion, misdirection, and scrutiny remained, growing stronger with every interaction. And yet, despite all the tension, there were moments of hope and validation. Some team members genuinely supported her, offered guidance, and facilitated her integration. But these moments were overshadowed by the persistent red flags, which served as reminders that her position was precarious. In Hollywood, insiders warn, the people who support you publicly are not always the ones who influence your career trajectory privately. Meghan's challenge was navigating these conflicting signals while maintaining confidence, poise, and strategic thinking. By the end of these early days on set, it became clear the environment was not neutral. It was charged, politically and psychologically. Meghan was learning a crucial lesson, one that many high-profile newcomers discover too late. Talent alone is rarely enough. Survival and success require understanding the hidden dynamics, predicting the moves of unseen power brokers, and managing both perception and reality simultaneously. And just as Meghan was beginning to understand this harsh lesson, insiders say, a public confrontation loomed, an incident that would humiliate her in front of the very people she needed to impress and challenge the trajectory of her Hollywood dream in ways that were irreversible. But what happened next would shock everyone and mark the moment her path in Hollywood took an unexpected, career-altering turn. No one expects to be humiliated at work. And yet, in Hollywood, insiders say, humiliation is often a tool, a weapon wielded with precision by those who understand the unspoken rules of power. For Meghan Markle, what happened next wasn't just a setback or a misstep. It was a confrontation so calculated, so intense, that it left her publicly rattled and privately shaken. It was the moment insiders now describe as the turning point, the instant her Hollywood dream teetered on the edge. It started during a high-profile production meeting, one intended to finalize creative decisions for the Amazon MGM project. The room was filled with executives, producers, directors, and other key players. Meghan had prepared meticulously, reviewing scripts, memorizing lines, and rehearsing her points with her team. She entered confident, ready to assert her vision, and to stake her claim in a project she had worked tirelessly to shape. On paper, she was ready. But Hollywood doesn't operate on preparation alone. It operates on power, influence, and perception, and she was about to confront the full force of both. Jason Orley, who had been observing Meghan's early interactions, reportedly decided the moment had arrived to assert his influence. Insiders described the meeting as initially routine, with standard discussion about scenes, scripts, and character arcs. But then, Orley introduced a sudden critique, unexpected, public, and personally pointed. He questioned Meghan's choices on a creative decision she had spent weeks preparing. Not softly, not constructively, but in a tone described by insiders as deliberately sharp, cutting, and designed to provoke. The effect was immediate. Meghan, poised under pressure in almost every previous public scenario, felt the weight of judgment in a room full of people who could shape her career. Imagine this. You've worked tirelessly for months. You've mastered your lines, your performance, and your professional presence. You walk into a room expecting collaboration, only to have your competence questioned in front of everyone. That is precisely what insiders say happened. Orley didn't just critique the project. He undermined Meghan personally, subtly, and publicly. Every eye in the room was now on her, and the implication was clear. Her authority, credibility, and place in the project were being questioned. Sources reveal that Meghan initially attempted to respond calmly, with logic and poise. She explained her decisions, cited her reasoning, and articulated her creative vision. But Orley, reportedly, escalated. He interrupted, challenged her every point, and subtly framed her responses as defensive or overconfident. The dynamic shifted from professional critique to psychological pressure, with Meghan caught in the crosshairs. Observers describe her demeanor as tense but composed, a balancing act between maintaining professionalism and managing the emotional impact of the humiliation. The public nature of the incident intensified its sting. Hollywood thrives on optics, and being seen as uncertain, unprepared, or fragile can be devastating. Every movement, every tone, every facial expression was scrutinized by executives and peers. Meghan's reaction, measured though it was interpreted through the lens of Orley's influence. Insiders suggest that this was no accident. Orley reportedly understood the ripple effect of public critique and wielded it to consolidate control and test her resilience. Adding to the complexity was the isolation. While Meghan had her team, the insiders suggest that Orley's network of allies subtly limited support. Advisors and assistants, normally present to buffer such confrontations, were constrained, strategically sidelined, or left navigating the confrontation from a distance. Meghan found herself facing not just professional critique, but psychological isolation, a tactic that magnifies the impact of public humiliation. The emotional toll was immense. Insiders describe Meghan leaving the meeting shaken but defiant, a combination of anger, disappointment, and disbelief. She had anticipated challenges, yes, but not orchestrated, high-stakes humiliation in a room filled with those who could influence her career trajectory. The impact of that confrontation didn't end in the room. It followed her onto the set, into subsequent meetings, and even into private communications. The psychological weight of being undermined publicly created a tension that lingered, shaping her interactions for days to come. What made the humiliation particularly damaging was its subtlety. Orley did not attack her personally in a way that could be easily reported. He framed his critique as professional, as if he were simply evaluating the project's needs. But insiders note the precision. Every comment, every challenge, was designed to undermine confidence, highlight perceived vulnerability, and signal to others that Meghan was not yet fully aligned with Hollywood's power structure. It was a masterclass in psychological leverage, executed quietly but effectively. Even as Meghan sought to regroup, the impact extended beyond immediate professional concerns. The incident, insiders say, began to influence how others on set viewed her. Supportive allies became cautious, second-guessing interventions. Crew members adjusted their interactions, unsure whether to openly collaborate or defer to Orley's assessment. And in Hollywood, perception often outweighs talent. Being publicly undermined in a controlled setting like this could ripple across future projects, press narratives, and negotiations. Despite the humiliation, Meghan did not back down entirely. She continued to assert her vision, meet deadlines, and participate fully in production activities. But insiders reveal that the psychological calculus had shifted. Every action required extra care, every interaction carried heightened stakes, and every meeting risked repeating the scenario. The experience, intense and personal, was a stark lesson in how Hollywood power dynamics operate. Talent alone was no longer sufficient. Understanding influence, strategy, and hierarchy was now critical for survival. And yet, even in this moment of public challenge, sources suggest a glimmer of determination. Meghan reportedly reflected privately on the incident, weighing her options and considering strategies to reclaim control over the situation. She understood that navigating Hollywood required more than skill. It required resilience, patience, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths about the system she had entered. But as anyone familiar with Orley's tactics knows, resilience alone would not be enough. Every subsequent move would have to be calculated, every response considered, and every potential ally strategically leveraged. The incident marked a turning point. According to insiders, it was the moment Meghan realized that Hollywood, despite its glitz and glamour, could be ruthlessly unforgiving. The confrontation with Orley was not just a professional setback. It was a psychological challenge, a public test of character, and a warning about the subtle ways influence can be wielded against even the most prominent figures. It reframed her understanding of the opportunity she had pursued, and it set the stage for decisions that would determine the trajectory of her career in ways she could not yet foresee. And just as Meghan began processing the humiliation, insiders say, the ripple effect was already in motion. Whispers, strategic conversations, and behind-the-scenes maneuvers that would compound the impact of that moment, ultimately threatening to derail her Hollywood dream entirely. But what came next would not just challenge her professionally. It would strike at the heart of her ambition, leaving her wondering if she could ever truly belong in the industry she had fought so hard to enter. The humiliation on set didn't exist in isolation. In Hollywood, nothing is isolated. Every action, every perceived misstep, every subtle power play reverberates through a network of influence, shaping perception, narrative, and opportunity. For Meghan Markle, the public undermining orchestrated by Jason Orley was the first domino. What followed, insiders reveal, was a cascade of fallout and backlash that would shake not just her immediate project, but her broader Hollywood ambitions. The day after the confrontation, Meghan reportedly felt the weight of isolation more acutely. Crew members, who had once been helpful or neutral, became noticeably reserved. Emails and memos that had previously circulated freely were now delayed or filtered. Minor logistical issues, script changes, wardrobe adjustments, scheduling, suddenly seemed amplified. Each hiccup reinforced the subtle message: your presence is tolerated, but your influence is conditional. The pattern was unmistakable. The environment was no longer neutral, and Meghan was being tested on multiple fronts simultaneously. Insiders describe a palpable tension among executives. While some admired her persistence and poise, others reportedly questioned whether she could withstand the pressures of Hollywood's hierarchical dynamics. Hollywood is, after all, as much about who you are perceived to be as what you can deliver. In this environment, visibility is a double-edged sword. It brings attention, yes, but it also magnifies mistakes, perceived flaws, and misalignments. Meghan's confrontation with Orley, though handled with professionalism, was quietly amplified behind closed doors, affecting how decision-makers evaluated her future in the studio. The backlash wasn't just internal. It extended outward in subtle ways that only those embedded in the network could detect. Production insiders hint that certain opportunities, which had initially seemed accessible, were quietly withdrawn or deprioritized. Scripts that might have showcased her range were delayed or reassigned. The very project she had invested in, which had once promised creative control and visibility, began shifting in ways that made her influence increasingly limited. Each change, insiders say, was strategically minor on its own, but collectively, they signaled a narrowing path. Then there were the whispers. In Hollywood, rumors travel faster than contracts. Sources suggest that private conversations among executives framed Meghan as difficult to manage or misaligned with studio culture, labels that can quietly damage reputation without ever being formally documented. Even the most subtle rumors, when amplified in the right circles, can close doors that were previously open. And for someone navigating a high-profile transition from royalty to Hollywood, these whispers were magnified, reaching media contacts, PR networks, and industry gatekeepers who influence opportunity behind the scenes. Meanwhile, Meghan's team scrambled to mitigate the impact. Advisors and strategists attempted damage control, highlighting her professionalism, emphasizing her talent, and reinforcing relationships with allies. But Hollywood insiders caution that the system is rarely forgiving to perceived vulnerabilities. Reputation is fragile, and even minor setbacks can be interpreted as signs of weakness. The very resilience that Meghan relied upon, the poise, confidence, and strategic thinking that had defined her public persona, was now being tested in a context where perception often outweighs reality. The emotional toll was immense. Meghan reportedly described the period as isolating and demoralizing, a stark contrast to the excitement and optimism that had marked the beginning of her Hollywood journey. The juxtaposition was jarring. One day, she was stepping confidently into a career-defining opportunity. The next, she was navigating subtle exclusions, whispered judgments, and the quiet recalibration of a project that had once seemed promising. Each interaction became a calculation, each conversation a potential minefield. Insiders indicate that the studio's internal communications reflected a growing consensus. Meghan's trajectory was uncertain, and her integration into the Hollywood ecosystem was more complex than anticipated. While she remained talented and high-profile, her presence was increasingly